our common heroes would be considered classical liberals.
Yeah.
Frederick Bastiat, Herbert Spencer,
Adam Smith.
You bet. Yeah.
Okay, and we're live.
Okay. Welcome to this fortnight's installment of Barney and Clyde.
Yeah.
Yeah, and we are, as usual, at the bar. We're getting started a little later than usual. The previous installments have been done in the afternoon, and we've had coffee. We're early evening, and so we thought...
more appropriate beverage
exactly.
situation.
You bet, yeah. It's cocktail hour, so...
Yeah, so Barney's made me a vodka tonic, and I'm quite grateful that he has. But it's Saturday, March the 30th, 2019. We're going to talk news, politics, culture.
We have a veritable cornucopia of...
they sure make it easy these days, don't they? They give us lots of fun.
Exactly. It's just like an avalanche. And we're trying out a new system here, and so Clyde's going to be wearing his engineer hat as well as his pundit hat, and his attention's going to be...
Yeah, the goal is to make the product better, to make the show better, to make the sound quality better, to make the video quality better. And so we've got a whole bunch of new gear. You don't really care about that, I'm sure, but we've got a whole bunch of new gear that we're trying out. So there may be little glitches and problems along the way. We'll get them sorted out. Try to make that painless to you.
Exactly. We want the most quality product we can deliver to you.
Yes. Speaking of quality products, the Green New Deal.
Yes.
What a quality product that is.
Yeah, and I just thought it was a stroke of genius of Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell to call for a vote on it.
Yeah.
I mean, it's not a fleshed out piece of legislation with specifics, but by golly, his thinking was, well, you've said in the document and elsewhere, and here he's speaking to Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez and Markey, the Senate co-sponsor, but... by golly, we've only got 12 years to go until
we're all going to die.
the mega apocalypse. Time's a wasting, folks. If you're serious about this, we'd better get on it. So let's have a vote. And AOC then tells all the Democrats in the House to vote present.
Yeah.
Not necessarily vote against it, but vote present. Which or it's not House, but Senate.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I thought it was interesting that there were two Democrats that voted against it, and one being Senator Joe Manchin, who West Virginia. There have been times that I've wondered if he wasn't on the verge of switching parties, because I mean he with a great deal of regularity goes against his party's line and supports initiatives that would be more in line with the other side of the aisle.
He should go to lp.org and sign up.
Well, yeah, maybe that's his. But and he's an example. Therefore, he doesn't do it all the time, and he still supports some things that have a very strong collectivist scent to them,
sure.
which would actually categorize him as what we used to call a liberal. And we're going to get into that later in the show. That's I'm telegraphing something we're going to do later in the show. Yeah, but and the various uses of the word liberal is something we're going to explore, and that's one of them. And but the other being Kristen Sinema, who's I'm pretty darn sure is farther left than Joe Manchin. But I thought it was interesting. She voted against it. Maybe it's because she comes from a red state and heard a lot from her constituents back home or something. I don't know.
Have like sort of the Joe Donnelly syndrome where you have to play nice with the other party, or you
right.
just don't.
Yeah. Right. But the point being, it went down in flames, and AOC had a complete meltdown about it, and was trying to point the finger back at Republicans, and they're not serious, and we intended this to be initiate a series of debates in the run-up to the 2020 election. Well, darling, if we've only got 12 years left, a series of debates in the run-up to the 2020 election eats up a year and a half of that 12 years. Time's a wasting.
Yeah.
As a matter of fact, with this business, and so who's not serious here? The pundit Ben Shapiro a while back had a tweet where he said, if this is really as urgent as they say, we'd better bomb all the coal plants in India and China today. we better be taking as drastic a measures as we can. But the point, she's not serious.
I think it's very clear when you read the legislation that it's not serious. And I'd like to start by saying I want a clean environment.
Sure.
I want as little climate change as possible. I would love it if the climate was predictable. It's not going to be, even if we don't manipulate it. But if you read the legislation, there's nothing specific in it. There's nothing specific. There's nothing measurable. They have it where by 2050, 100% of the nation's energy must be on sustainable renewables, all that kind of stuff. Well, there is no sustainable renewable at this point that could feed the energy needs of the entire nation. Furthermore, there's the only thing they have as far as like a SMART goal, like specific, measurable, actionable, realistic, and time bound, is the time bound part. They just know that by 2050 we have to.
Actually, I think it's 2030.
It might be.
Yeah.
I thought I remembered reading 2050 in the
maybe
legislation.
For some parts of this.
Which is funny because that's after our 12-year death day.
Yeah.
So, but anyway, it's clearly that it's not serious.
Yeah.
About it, and with people still flocking to the coast, and people on the coast being of a fairly neoliberal bent. Why would they be moving to the coast in such numbers if the tides are going to rise on it?
Yeah.
Now again, I'm not a climate change denier by any means. I don't know the specific science, and I'm not going to claim that I do.
Yeah.
But I have concerns that that this type of legislation gets in there, and I think it's an epidemic of all legislation that there's not specific goals that they want to meet, the means by which they're going to meet them, and the results that they expect to get from having done so.
And here's another very saddening thing about the times in which we live is that with their extreme viewpoint that there's no more discussing it. We've got to move, and we've got to take drastic measures and collectively and drastically change the way humankind is living. And it forces the other side. I constantly, even personally, have to keep a check on myself not to be taking an absolutist position on the other side. A digging in of heels and saying, there's nothing to climate change. It's all a bunch of hooey. Like you're saying, it's a very broad and complex subject, and it might be kind of an Alinskyite tactic to force the other side to dig in its heels and say the whole thing's a bunch of hooey, and that gets us nowhere either.
Yeah. And I think that the problem with trying to choose between Republican, Democrat, whatever agenda that they're trying to push is the assumption that one's all right and one's all wrong, right? Because they're not wrong that we need to do something about our impact in the environment. There is pollution, right? I think that people are alarmist about it a lot, but there's some really bad stuff.
Sure.
And those externalities
in countries like China, for certain.
That's another thing. Let's say we get the
Beijing. People choke when they walk out, and
Los Angeles. Well, if you got the Green New Deal passed in the United States, and we stopped producing all of that impact that we're doing to the climate right now, would climate change not be a problem anymore? I mean, that's not enough.
Right. Yeah. And that's part of the problem with the Paris Accord. If every country on Earth followed to the letter every one of its requirements, it would not reduce. It would not meet the demands of the document.
Yeah. And speaking of demand, we have a high energy demand in the country. We consume a lot of energy, and we consume a lot of energy not just to pollute and to cause problems and sell stuff, but to keep ourselves warm, to keep ourselves cool, to get from place to place, to provide for our families, to be able to live our lives, and energy is very necessary.
Yeah, and advancements like CAT scans and laser surgery and that kind of thing. You bet. And the fact remains that at this point, the denser the rule of thumb remains true that the denser the energy form, the less expensive it is, and the more diffuse it is, the more expensive it is.
And I think one of the problems that we see, again, one side's not all right and one side's not all wrong. There's a lot of nuance to it, and when it comes to energy demand, the left is not wrong in their critique of the subsidies that oil companies are getting, and that there's a lot of bad money in fossil fuels. They're not wrong about that. The right's not wrong about the limitations of green energy and sustainable energy and the myriad of problems that come along with it, right? So both of those energy systems, renewables and fossil fuels, are both heavily subsidized by one various component of government or another. And I personally think it'd be nice to just watch them duke it out in the marketplace. And it seems like the renewables eventually would have to win, just by their nature renewable.
Yeah. And the private sector is looking into this. Companies in such fields as power generation and transportation and heating and cooling and all those kinds of things are looking. They have departments and divisions that are completely dedicated to looking into making this more economically feasible.
Yeah.
But I just find it interesting that she thinks she's assuming some kind of validity, moral superiority, by trying to point the finger back at Republicans for forcing this vote. She either does or does not mean it. McConnell was basically saying, "Okay, let's put your money where your mouth is," and I just see a real urge to control one's fellow human beings, and this I just really do.
There's an authoritarian sort of bend to it.
Yeah,
for
sure.
So that is a good segue. I think,
okay.
My question to you before the show started was: do the modern liberals, neoliberals, do they have a license to the word liberal?
And and we talked a little about it. It's got an interesting etymology, an interesting history. There was a time when, of course, and to kind of reiterate, one of the points of our show is that he's a small libertarian, I'm a small C conservative, and it's fun to explore points of convergence, the overlap in our Venn diagram, and also the points of divergence. But our common heroes would be considered classical liberals.
Yeah.
Frederick Bastiat, Herbert Spencer,
Adam Smith.
You bet. Yeah, and we're both. Yeah. And these guys were called themselves. Well, even on up to Ludwig von Mises and Friedrich Hayek. You bet. Yeah. They called themselves classical liberals, and somehow or another, and in the 20th century,
they called themselves liberals. Classical didn't get appended to it until the authoritarians hijacked the word. Liberal.
You bet, yeah. And by the time I was a kid in the late 50s and early and throughout the 1960s, being raised by a very staunch Goldwaterite conservative, the term when folks sitting around at a dinner party got to talking about politics, and liberal meant basically Democrat, and running the whole span as it consisted in those days. And a whole lot of stuff's happened since then. Of course, there was Michael Harrington and the Democratic Socialists of America, and taking the party, starting the. But that's when the older school liberals, meaning Democrats, were starting to get elbowed out. The Scoop Jacksons, the Hubert Humphreys, now you'll see what I was telegraphing earlier. There's just a handful of them left. Joe Manchin's one. Our a guy who was our governor and then our senator from Indiana, Evan Bayh, was a guy had a basically collectivist orientation to the world, but it was informed by an understanding that you had to have a basic free market underpinning to the whole darn thing.
Yeah. Sort of like
John F. Kennedy believed in. I mean, was a big crusader for lower taxes all the time throughout his administration.
We lost the Blue Dog Democrat, didn't we?
Yeah. There you go.
And let me throw some praise to Hillary Clinton for just a second. Please don't.
This ought to be interesting.
Well, here's the thing about Hillary Clinton.
Yeah.
About the Clintons in general. You feed people what they want to hear to some degree, and Hillary Clinton said something in the 2016 debates. I think it was during the primaries, and there was a lot of talk about socialism because of Bernie Sanders, and she said, "Well, of course we're capitalists," referring to the Democrat Party. Of course we're capitalists, but what we have to do is sort of rein in the excesses of capitalism.
Yeah.
And I don't believe that she believes that. I believe she believes she'd do whatever it takes to gain power, but I think that there are a lot of Democrats from that era that you're talking about, that those blue dog Democrats that were like, yeah, John F. Kennedy's, yeah, we need the market to work, we need the market to be as free as possible, and there are some places where it disenfranchises people, and we have to rein in those at those areas, you know. And I think it's a much more reasonable argument than the modern democratic socialist. And
there's yet another use of the term liberal in a world affairs context. The post-World War II balance of powers, post-World War II arrangement of forces on the world stage has been referred to, and clear up to the present time, as the liberal world order. And they mean something entirely different from what people did in 1968 dinner parties when they talk about those darn liberals. That's a usage in a domestic sense.
Right,
The liberal world order just meant a world where people were trying their best to prevent another world war, and looking to the United States to provide the main guidance in world bodies, and also provide the economic heft and military might to see that things didn't go nuts.
Yeah. And you know, that I think you go back to the, like you said, the etymology of the word liberal. You get liberty, right? Freedom, like libre, you know. And that was applied by those classical thinkers, those, you know, the Bastiats, the Tocquevilles, and people like that, that saw that people should be free to make their own choices, to transact in the economy how they please, because up until that point, you know, much of what government did was dictate every aspect of everybody's life. They told you what kind of clothes you had to wear. They, you know, your social order was determined by the state, which was highly intertwined in the church. You know, and all these things that you know, modern liberals would say are bad things. That's what the classical liberals saw, right? And they developed this philosophy that the human being is the highest order. That the human is sovereign over him or herself.
Yes, individual sovereignty. That was their key.
But after that, you know, if you look at the track record of you know, beyond the blue dog Democrats, and where this sort of socialist thinkers are coming back into fashion, you know, it's all a matter of force. We're going to force you to behave a certain way. We're going to make sure that you don't step out of line. And I think a lot of the people who call themselves Democrats and democratic socialists even have a lot of good intentions, and they want to see right done in the world. But I just don't think that they understand the can of worms that they could potentially be opening by setting the precedent that everything has to be determined by the brute force of government.
The whole history of how the path the Democrat Party has taken since about 1970 is very interesting. This Michael Harrington, who founded the Democrat Democratic Socialists of America around that time, and of course that was the period of time when Cloward and Piven were and Saul Alinsky were doing their thing, and the whole idea of inviting the radicals, the SDS types and Weather Underground, come on back in the system, and taking their cue from the Italian thinker Antonio Gramsci, the long march through the institutions. Come on back, go to law school, go to journalism school, go to divinity school, go to business school, and infiltrate the system. And by golly, that's the path it's taken, and infiltrate the Democratic Party and elbow out these old blue dogs and liberals.
It's interesting, and that's clearly happened.
You betcha.
And it's almost as though, and maybe the news cycle makes this out a little bit more than it maybe really is. Maybe there are more blue dogs left than we think. They just don't get the press.
Yeah.
I hope so.
Yeah.
But it seems like that's clearly underway.
Yeah. The Democrats I know locally, and I one of my gigs in life, I cover local government meetings for a media company, and they're sane people, and
absolutely,
yeah, they're nice and civilized and civic minded and all that good stuff. Yeah. Anyway. Yeah. All right.
But sometimes they just don't. They don't understand the like I said, the can of worms that they get, the Pandora's box of boot to neck authoritarianism that they could be letting out.
Exactly.
And I don't want to be hyperbolic about that, because I realize that it's a ways to go from saying, oh, we should have clean energy, to there's a boot on your throat and a police state.
Yeah.
But really, when you set that precedent that someone's going to swoop in and do all this stuff from the central government, that's sort of how all of those nightmare situations began.
Shall we segue into topic number 3?
Sounds good.
All right. Recently, two metropolitan international airports have set up areas for additional dining. They've
classy, fine airport dining.
And everybody's looking at that. They wanted to devote a little more space to more restaurant choices, and in each case, the city council said one chain that's not welcome here is Chick-fil-A. San Antonio and Buffalo International Airports both did that. In the case of the San Antonio Airport, there's been pushback. The First Liberty Institute, which is a law firm that gets involved in cases like this, sent a letter to Federal Transportation Secretary Elaine Chao alleging that religious discrimination may have been made by the San Antonio City Council. And then Texas Attorney General Ken Paxton has notified the mayor and the city council of his decision to open an investigation. And we were discussing before the show began, you got to be kind of careful here. I've got certain views on the subject. You do. They probably diverge some. You could. There's all kinds of layers. You could look at this on different people's views on what sound Christian doctrine means, and then how much Christian doctrine should influence a company's policies, which, in the case of Chick-fil-A, it certainly does. Their corporate mission says, we glorify God in all we do. And then, of course, on up to the questions arise, certainly in the San Antonio case, what kinds of organizations they give charitable contributions to. Well, it's stuff like the Fellowship of Christian Athletes, but the point being, these and we were talking about who actually owns international airports in big cities, like San Antonio, Buffalo, Indianapolis, wherever. And it's a complex arrangement, but it comes down to the city in each case owns the airport, and that's government. That's the state. And can the state ban a private organization, a profit-making company that sells food, from doing business in the airport on the basis of its stated what informs its thrust of its business practices. You got to think about it. Wouldn't there be an outcry if they banned a Muslim, a halal shop that wanted to go in one of these airports?
Yeah.
Yeah.
It would be a totally different statement.
Yeah.
Wouldn't it?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I didn't think about it like that. And why does the federal commission
or the transportation department?
They decide whether it's Chick-fil-A versus Burger King or
no, I'm.
But the city government would
Mm-hmm.
allow some kind of partnership between whatever restaurants would or whatever businesses do business within the airport.
Right.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
So.
Yeah, it appears to me that the San Antonio City Council is the final arbiter on who gets to lease restaurant space in their new dining wing or area or whatever.
Yeah. So it makes me wonder. We talked about the Green New Deal and the vagueness of legislation, and that to me that sounds like that strikes again in this regard. Like, what are the parameters under which a restaurant is barred?
By what section of some code are you doing this?
Yeah. You're making it up as you go along.
Yeah.
You're punishing a business that doesn't really have views that many other might not.
No, and I'm going to state here, you could not ask for a friendlier and more innocuous organization than Chick-fil-A. They hire anybody that looks like they're going to be a fit for the team. They have lots of gays and people of all demographic groups working for their franchises around the country, and they serve anybody. And they, as a matter of fact, their corporate mission statement, it says we want to glorify God in all we do, and also bless the lives. I forget the exact wording, but it's something like bless the lives of all those who come in contact with Chick-fil-A in any way. And so
I think that on one regard, no matter what you do, if you're successful and wildly successful, you'll have enemies.
Yeah.
And I hate that about our world, our modern world. But it seems like every company, no matter what they do, and they're coming after Apple, about overseas money, and Tim Cook was like, 3/4 of our business is outside of the United States. You know what I mean? Like, what exactly? What is the rule by which you own part of our structure?
Right.
And once that's established, stop moving the goalpost. So again, Chick-fil-A, they don't know what they need to do.
Yeah, right.
You know what I mean? They don't know under what parameters they're welcome or what or diswelcome.
Yeah, right. What would you have us shed in the way of corporate mission or policy or specific policies or anything in order to be able to set up a franchise in your airport? Yeah.
But on the other hand, I think that there's some legitimate critique of Chick-fil-A because, we talked about earlier before the show started about how they have donated money to some organizations that do like gay conversion.
Yeah, engaged in. Yeah,
and that's a really bad situation. I don't want to say nightmarish, but it might be. For the stuff that people are forced to do, and I don't believe in people forcing other people to do things.
Right.
And I think that. Yeah, gay conversion therapy is really awful.
Well, okay. I'll tell you what. We're busy guys, and we only have so much time to research stuff. Any of you who are watching this, listening to this, feel free to chime in on our YouTube comment thread, Facebook comment thread, wherever you'd like, with any kind of research you've done. To what extent and in what form has that been a practice of Chick-fil-A?
Yeah, and have you been discriminated against by Chick-fil-A?
Sure, yeah.
Have you seen that happen at other places, or You know, have you seen clearly the
refused
opposite
service
be
or
the case?
refused an employment opportunity or whatever.
Or have you seen a company or an individual that's vilified in the press? Have you seen them acting altruistically in some way?
Yeah.
You know, it'd be really interesting to see what people come up with.
Okay. Yeah. How are we doing here?
We're pretty good, actually. We're only about halfway through.
Okay. All right. I'll tell you what. Identity politics just infuses nearly everything anymore, don't you think? Doesn't it?
Yeah. What?
And
what's particularly
you got to wonder. You know, every year, come January, we make a huge deal out of Martin Luther King's birthday, and the centerpiece of his whole 13 years on the national and world stage. The centerpiece of it was that 1963 "I Have a Dream" speech, in which he talked about a colorblind society, and a society where, and you could extrapolate that. Since then, we've come to look at other demographic groups as needing to be sure that they're not marginalized and so forth. The vision he was after was a society in which people would be judged by the content of their character.
Yeah, in those words.
Yes, and we're going in the other direction so fast and furious. And of course, you know, there's all kinds of hate crime. Hate crime related instances we could bring up.
I think you're talking about something really good though about Martin Luther King, and the centerpiece of his entire message was that the content of the character thing.
Exactly.
And people, you know, you normally get, you know, being white dudes. There's only so much you're allowed to comment on in the public eye, right? But I will just say that I find it really frustrating that that we had been told all our lives that Martin Luther King message. I grew up with that in school. We talked about it all the time, about the content of somebody's character, not the color of their skin. You shouldn't judge people based on how they look, where they come from. You should judge people by what they do and how they act and all that kind of stuff. And now that's completely changed, and the people who still try to live by that content of character standard, now that's seen as problematic. Maybe not racist, but problematic. You know. Well,
and I don't want to really, in the interest of time. And for instance, we did cover Jussie Smollett last time, so we have touched on the hate crime business. But here's another angle to the identity politics tainting public policy. The Illinois State House of Representatives has voted to make all publicly held corporations have at least one African American and one woman on its board, with a $300,000 fine for violation. Now, even a publicly held corporation is still a private entity. I mean, you know, it may be traded on the New York Stock Exchange or NASDAQ or whatever, but the
that's a big distinction that people need to know. When they say publicly held company, they don't mean that it's the post office.
Exactly.
It's not
people who, of their own free choice, maybe on the advice of their investment counselor, you know, their wealth management person that they deal with, but of their own free will, they decided to buy X number of shares of stock in this company. It's still a privately owned company. It's publicly held, but
if I open a restaurant,
yes,
it's private. I'm open to the public. Somebody walking, this is a public place. Well, it's actually a private place.
Not in the sense that City Hall or a bus station.
Right, exactly. It's not government run. It's not funded publicly.
Right.
In the case of a lot of American corporations, they might be funded publicly.
There is some of that, yes.
But so that's still a private organization.
And so that, once again, that is the main point. But it also this business of this kind of legislation does not move us in the direction of a colorblind society that looks at people on the content of their character.
Yeah.
And companies come in all shapes and sizes. They're in all kinds of businesses. They deliver all kinds of different services and all kinds of different products. And you're going to need certain kinds of minds to be on your board.
Yeah.
And you may or may not, and you may or may not find people with the required demographic classifications that are going to fit with what you need.
What if one of these companies had a board that was made up entirely of African American women?
Yeah.
Would they have a diversity problem?
Yeah.
I think they would.
Yeah.
But they would meet the criteria for this.
Oh well, and I'm going to mention it here. I'm probably.
I'm stepping it, Barney.
Yeah. Well, Savannah, Georgia. There was a mayoral candidates forum recently.
Mm-hmm.
No media except for black press was invited.
I saw that.
Yeah, and so I guess that's just a footnote to what we're discussing, but it does point up that
is that a public?
we seem to be coming to a point where we're cool with exclusion in certain sense, in certain and even this could you could make the case that it's exclusion. You've got one more seat to fill on your board, and you have to fill it with this particular demographic. When those scouting about for potential candidates have found someone that doesn't fit that demographic that really needs to be on that board, but you're not going to be able to put them.
Yeah, I think it's really sad that we have to get to well, I'm saying we have to do that. Let me rephrase that. A company is going to act in its best interest.
Exactly.
It's not going to, if there is a person out there, and this is, if you charge them with being greedy capitalists, okay, fine, they're greedy capitalists. A greedy capitalist would not turn away the most talented person to work on their board, to work on their
management
stores,
team, yeah, right.
to mop the floor.
Yeah, right.
Whoever's got the most talent that they can get for the least amount of money.
Yes.
That's the person that they're going to put into employment, and
I think we discussed this last time too. Capital is a lot like water. It flows to where it's going to find its best place to flourish.
Yeah, the path of least resistance. Right?
Yeah, right.
Yeah,
and
there might be an argument in the fact that, okay, there's not enough African Americans or enough women that are getting the opportunities to get them to the level where they're able to qualify for those types of jobs. There's an argument. That's something that we can find out. There's data for that. I don't know the answer.
That's a sociocultural problem. The heavy hand of the state. Really, this is the same principle as minimum wage. Mm-hmm. And I've long... I don't think minimum wage has ever come up on the Barney and Clyde show.
You're determined to step in it, aren't you?
Yeah,
talk about minimum wage?
Sure.
Okay.
And here are the 3 reasons minimum wage is real bad and real wrong.
Okay.
Got that, people? All right.
If you see it get over this yellow line, you got to back up a little bit.
Okay. It distorts the market value of an hour of labor. And it's government telling a private entity how to conduct its affairs, i.e. what to pay employees. And government, I'm hard-pressed to think of a situation in which government should be allowed to tell a private organization how to conduct its affairs.
Or at what price a person should be allowed to sell their labor.
Right. Those are the first 2. And then 3 is the sociocultural thing. It elbows out the most economically vulnerable among us, namely minority youth. With the higher you raise a minimum wage, the harder it is to bring them into the labor force.
Yeah. And you also, one of the critiques of capitalism that continues to come from the left is that these big corporations amass too much money and too much capital, too much power. Mm-hmm. and then they leverage that power against other people.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, okay. Let's accept that as essentially true.
A hypothetical given
hypothetical,
anyway.
yeah. Let's say that's the truth. Okay. Well, if you put the strain of a minimum wage on the business community, what businesses are going to be most impacted by increases in the minimum wage? It's going to be the small businesses, the struggling businesses that either compete with the big businesses or don't provide what they provide.
The locally owned coffee shop.
The locally owned coffee shop. Restaurants are a good example.
Yeah.
You know, any kind of food service type of thing where the margins are really, really low, you know, and the regulations are really, really high, and the overhead's really high. Those types of businesses can't absorb it like an Amazon can.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And then if they go out of business, you're left to having Amazon or those other gigantic companies fill that void,
right,
provide those services, and you've just made them bigger and stronger.
And which gets away from what progressives, leftists, say they want, which is acting locally. You know, keep it local, keep it local. It becomes harder to do.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And there's impacts to the minimum wage too. There was in, I think it was Seattle, where they enacted a $12 minimum wage, right? And they studied over a couple of years, and what they found was that the average income for the lowest income people dropped by $125 a month because they were working fewer hours. Because the places that they worked, the McDonald's and the you know, places where they worked to get minimum wage, they just weren't going to pay that price. And the reason they're not going to pay a higher price is because hiring somebody is an investment in the output of that person. If that person can't output a certain number of dollars for the company, it doesn't make sense to keep that person an employee. You wouldn't do that with any capital goods.
Right.
So why would you do that with a labor force?
Right. There's one more level or angle, if you will, of this, and it kind of brings us full circle. The whole idea that people with a bureaucratic mindset in a as Ronald Reagan put it in his Time for Choosing speech, a far-off capital, can know what Company X out here in the heartland needs and envisions for its direction. And like I say, it brings us full circle because it gets back to something AOC said as part of her as part of the aftermath of her Green New Deal getting shut down. She said, well, you know, we need to look at regenerative agriculture, and I'm trying to think exactly what refining grains so that cows are healthier or something. I mean, because it was in conjunction with the whole cow fart thing. Okay. And she said, well, we need to, you know, research grains that are gonna make cows less flatulent or something. I think that's what she was getting at. Okay. And the point being, she's a 30-year-old bartender who spent her entire life in East Coast big cities. What she knows about a nice German Lutheran farm family operation in central Indiana is about zilch. Yeah. And you know, she's never stepped inside any of the agricultural studies buildings at Purdue, or
or did she run the bar? Did she do the payroll?
The
accounting? Did she have any of that? I mean, Bernie Sanders seems to have, you know, what 50, 60 years on her, and he hasn't learned a damn thing. You know what I mean?
Right.
So
yeah.
I don't know. I think that we talked about Adam Smith, right? And the invisible hand of the economy. If you're familiar with that concept, Adam Smith in what was it, the late 1700s?
As a matter of fact, The Wealth of Nations came out the same year as the Declaration of Independence.
Oh wow, yeah, that's
right. 1776,
So in that he talked about the invisible hand that sort of moves everything, right? That And people
The
critique
economy, we're so used to talking about things in a macro sense. The economy actually consists of millions of individual transactions.
I was going to say that, exactly. Millions and millions of tiny visible hands.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? Actually touching stuff and actually making it better and assembling it and putting it out there.
I'd like to buy that. You would? Well, boy, I'd sure like to sell it to you. What are you thinking in terms of price? This and that. Well, I need more than 1% more than covering my costs. Well, how about this? All right, we got a deal. Boom. All these millions of agreements.
And you can put that to labor, too.
Yeah.
I've got something to... I don't have anything to sell. The only thing I can sell is the fact that I could do something for you.
Stock shelves or whatever.
I'll stock your shelves, yeah. Well, what are you thinking about in terms of price? Well, I'm thinking about $10 an hour. Well, I don't have $10 an hour. I've got $7 an hour. You know what I mean?
That may or may not work for the guy.
Well, I can't really do that. I think I can get $10 out of this guy, or maybe I can get $9 out of this
exactly.
guy. You know what I mean? Or maybe I'm getting $0, so $7 is better, and I'll take that. You know what I mean? And and one of the things that I really hate about the minimum wage is that if you're in that situation, there's a point where you are a diminishing return for a business, right? There's certain. I mean, I hate to say it, but there's certain people, a certain lack of skill set that is a diminishing return for people. So if they take you on, it's going to cost them money, at least for a period of time until they get you put together.
Yeah, right.
Until they get you trained, until they get you
to become an honest to goodness team player that contributing.
And that is the road for a lot of people. That minimum wage job or that low wage job is the road to getting experience and moving on in their careers. It's the first rung on the ladder, and to take that first rung off means a lot of people aren't going to be able to climb the ladder. And to play devil's advocate, though, if you really get into and research minimum wage actions, there's a lot of conflicting information. You can find a lot of research that says, well, the minimum wage did this well in this area and that well in that area, and I think that it is the market's nature to price as low as possible, or to pay as low as possible.
Yeah.
Obviously, it's going to try to pay as low as possible. And there's probably a threshold where they could pay more without impacting the economy too negatively.
Yeah.
Right? There's probably a buffer zone. Milton Friedman, one of my economic heroes, talked about...
Here.
Yeah, there you go. To Milton.
Yeah.
We should
to Milt.
to pour one out for him.
You bet, yeah.
But he was saying that what you should do with minimum wage, if you're going to have a minimum wage, is to set it, index it to inflation, and then let it go. Just leave it. Because businesses will at least know what to expect.
Yes.
They know that it's going to climb with inflation.
Yeah.
I kind of think it should be, if there's going to be one, it should be indexed to the amount of productivity that person can produce. You know what I mean? If they're going to have a minimum wage, why is it a dollar amount? Why isn't it indexed to how much you can produce $100 an hour. You know what I mean? Cool. That means you get $10. You know what I mean? Oh, you can produce $200 an hour. You get $20. You know, something like that.
Yeah. What do we got left in the way of time?
We're sitting at 49 minutes.
Okay.
10 minutes
All right. Because something just occurred to me. Another topic that we could delve into, which is the vitriol that Education Secretary Betsy DeVos has come in for.
Okay. Yeah.
Over the slashing to slashing Special Olympics.
Oh. Okay.
Yeah, and she. The top levels of the administration, I don't know, maybe it goes clear up to President Trump or something, but all the cabinet level departments have been charged with reducing their budgets by 10%.
Okay, yeah.
And that's why she said, we had to make some very hard choices. And all over Facebook and Twitter, leftists are just outraged about the cuts to Special Olympic funding. one thing, it's kind of like public broadcasting. The Special Olympics only gets about 10% max of its fund. Most of it comes from private charitable contributions. Yeah. It's not like that. They dry up if they don't get federal funding.
Yeah.
Two, and I got a basic question. And I'm asking, you know me, I'm a Madisonian.
Okay.
Why is the federal government in the Special Olympics business at all?
Yeah.
And this also gets back to the pointy-head bureaucrat in the far distant capital business. People in a municipality, in a community, such as ours, who have made friends with Special Olympics athletes and their families, and followed them as they train for competitions, and go out to cheer them on, and so forth. You diminish that immediate connection with them, the more there's distant dollars being involved in your relationship with them. Am I onto something there?
Yeah. Okay. We talk about public broadcasting.
If my money's coming right out of my pocket to person, a Special Olympics athlete, he's grateful for that, and I've got an investment, and we're and I go out and say, yay, all right, you did great in the 40-meter dash or whatever.
Ski-a-thon or
exactly
whatever.
Right. Yeah.
All of those things, from a principle perspective, I don't think the federal government should be funding Special Olympics.
No, where's it in the Constitution?
I don't think it should be funding anything that's not in the Constitution, essentially. Now, that being said,
all right.
I saw those things that I love NPR, I love PBS when they're
looking at
lots of
that,
talks about cutting that, and I thought I like PBS too, but I don't like it enough that I would...
Downton Abbey, yeah, right.
Right.
Sure.
I don't really like Downton Abbey.
Nova.
But I don't like it enough to send the government brute squad over with their guns to forcefully extract their money from those people in order to support it. I don't love it enough for that, right? I think that people... And what happened was they started getting tons of donations during that conversation, right?
Yeah.
And Rex Bell, the libertarian candidate for governor of Indiana in the last cycle, said that, well, that's how it works, right? When you start pulling the government funding out of stuff, guess what happens? If people like it and support it, they'll do it voluntarily. And if they don't do it voluntarily, you're seeing democracy in action. You're seeing the fact that people don't want to support that. They're going to have to find another way to do it. But, that being said, I think there are way bigger fish to fry when it comes to spending, when it comes to budget.
Yeah.
Why we're starting at PBS and the Special Olympics is beyond me.
I know. And someday, the Barney and Clyde show probably ought to take on that big 800-pound gorilla in the room, which is why our debt and deficit are as looming as they are.
Okay.
And we know. Do I need to spell it out?
Yeah.
Yeah, we know what they. We know, and it's it's a third rail that people just feel like they can't touch. But if we don't, we're headed off the precipice.
And I think that those things like PBS and Special Olympics and things like that, I think maybe it's just a little bit of budget virtue signaling. Like we're making the tough cuts. We're getting the budget back in order, but they're not getting the budget back in order. We're still going into deficit. The deficit is as higher than it's ever been.
I know.
We're $21 trillion in debt total now.
And the very stable genius, our current president, a perfect example of why he's not an actual conservative. Why people who try to claim him as a standard bearer for conservatism are off the mark. Is why he's ideologically inconsistent is this very thing. He refuses to touch what we all know needs to be touched if we're going to really deal with this thing like grown-ups.
Yeah, and that is
Social Security and Medicare. There you go. I said it.
All right.
I put it out there.
Well, maybe we should do that. Maybe we should
All
write
right.
down
Yeah.
the Barney and Clyde's proposed budgets.
Barney and Clyde touched the third rail.
Okay.
All right.
Sounds good.
Well, listen.
All right.
I've got a few weeks ago. My wife brought home an Instant Pot, and everything I've tried so far has been great. I haven't had a fail yet, and tonight I'm going to try a wild mushroom risotto, and so I better get up there.
Wild mushrooms, yeah.
All just criminy, and some baby bellas to.
If I find any chickens or hens of the woods, I'll bring some to you.
Okay, yeah. All right. Well, listen.
Cheers, my friend.
Hey, you bet. Yeah. Thanks for tuning in to another fortnightly installment of Barney and Clyde.
Yeah.
Hope you enjoyed it. Hope we didn't make you too mad.
Send us the feedback, whether
Exactly.
it's good or bad.
You bet. Yeah. Feedback. We love feedback. So.
All right.
And have a great rest of your weekend, everybody, and a great fortnight. We'll see you in 2 weeks.
Yeah,
Right here at the
fortnight.
bar.